Section number 9 from my presentation, entitled Societal Psychosis and Our Epidemic of Social Narcissism. Here's a quote from me. Sane society? Remember, it's the sane people who are hacking up the rainforests, killing off the honeybees, creating the ozone hole and making it larger, and melting the polar ice caps. Excuse me. These sane people obviously want to destroy as much life on Earth that is sanely possible. The time has come to revise our concepts of sanity and insanity. It's instructive to witness these brilliant minds at work as they allowed the Earth's population to go completely crazy, as they invented the atom bomb and then allowed nation after nation to go nuclear, as they allowed massive overpopulated nations like China and India and Malaysia and Indonesia and Brazil and etc. to industrialize and modernize to the point where we're all basically dead in another 20 years. We have obviously just entered the era of brilliant sanity. This is a quote from Paralegochrist, his novel The Dwarf, which is the main reason he won the Nobel Prize in Literature back, I think, in the early 20s. Human beings need flattery. Otherwise, they do not fulfill their purpose, not even in their own eyes. Paralegochrist. Liberalism is Christianity without Jesus. It is the ultimate goal and final resting place of the Judeo-Christian disease. America as a Soviet psychoprison. Americans live in what I call a Disneyland dream world fantasy camp. See Section 6, the American plastics industry above. There is rampant psychosis in America today, and many varieties of psychosis in America today. Self-ignorance versus self-knowledge. And I drew a diagram which I call the continuum of self-knowledge. On the extreme is self-deception, delusionism, and psychosis, and on the other side is perfect self-knowledge. Behavioral and operant conditioning aspects of America. Half of the country is going completely psychotic. The other half is already there. World's most psychotic society. Post-mortem Americans are the single most propagandizable populace ever to exist on this planet. You shouldn't pat yourselves on the back too much because you see through Clinton and the lies of American political subculture. Anybody without psychotic needs can see through Clinton immediately. The thing is, everybody in this society is trying to satisfy some psychotic needs or other through some public forum. After all, this is the single most psychotic society in human history, obviously. American society is personality disordered. Every day, a larger percentage of the American populace becomes psychotic. Every day, more and more people in America cross over the boundary into mental illness of one kind or another. It is not necessarily about schizophrenia or full-time psychotic states. In actuality, few psychotic people are psychotic every minute of the day. We are in the midst of an epidemic of social narcissism. It's also about borderline conditions and axis, too, of the DSM. But also, nihilism itself can become a psychological disorder or else will trigger symptomatology. Psycho-illness in our society is breaking out in phenomena observable everywhere. Coming out in serial killings, mass murderings, child molestings, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy. All behavior produced by a woman, essentially. That woman being mommy. Serial murder is not about the serial murderer himself. It's about the society around him as a whole. These problems are not relegated to the individual sicko. These problems are the result of the constitution of our society today overall and in general. All of us are partly responsible for producing our nation's killers and psychos. The reason people are so obsessed with Saddam Hussein and Adolf Hitler and so on is that they all want to be Saddam Hussein and Adolf Hitler. There's a little Hitler in everybody today. Of equal importance is appearing to the external world not as Hitler-Saddam devotees, but as human rights heroes such as Martin King, Rosa Parks, Mahatma Gandhi, and so forth. This is the direct result of please love me phenomena. Victimhood today is power. You can get away with a lot more head games, etc. if you can convince people at large that you are a victim. Jews, blacks, women, homosexuals, and now rednecks, southerners, city dwellers, coal miners. Everybody is practicing victimism in PMA today. There's a victimhood group for every type of person you can come up with today. Words as a substitute for actions. In narcissistic America, words become a substitute for identities. Let me read that again. Words as a substitute for actions. In narcissistic America, words become a substitute for identities. This is a very important point, which I'll go into later. This is fine. The coming war between multi-personality persons, or multis, and homogeneously personality persons, or homos. Hello. My name is David, and Elizabeth, and Jonathan, and Julie, and Louise Davis. I am David, and I am Elizabeth, and I am Jonathan, and I am Julie, and I am Louise, all in one body. I am a multi-personalitied, oppressed multi-person. I and my fellow sufferers have been oppressed by homo-personalitied or homogeneously personality oppressors for years now. Homo-personalitied people are racist against multis. We multis hereby declare war on our boring single-personalitied oppressors. If you have only one true personality, you are limited and fascistic. Your very existence is abhorrent to multis and therefore oppresses multis. But we are starting to fight back. Remember, for every one of you, there are at least one of us who are two or more. So you better watch out. Sticks and stones, ... When I was a kid, there was a common saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never harm me. A number of dramatic changes for the worse have happened in this country since the 60s and 70s. You don't hear that phrase anymore. It has been replaced. What you hear now goes something like this. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words do permanent damage. This is a symptom of a radical change for the worse in this society. Borderline Conditions and Pathological Narcissism is the title of a book by Otto Sternberg, who's one of the original self-psychologists and object relations theorists. Most of the people trying to shut down people's speech are not doing it for political reasons. They're doing it for psychological reasons, most prominently of all, shielding themselves and their allies from potential emotional and narcissistic vulnerability and wounding. The growing college censorship and suppression of speech movement is related to this phenomenon of narcissistic vulnerability. The removal movement is yet another example of violent reactions against words or ideas that may trigger a narcissist's vulnerability to verbal or visual wounding. In this case, it's statues, buildings, parks, and etc., named after famous people of the Confederacy and the Civil War. The Jewish movement promoting their version of events leading up to and during the Second World War and the idea of Holocaust denial is also related to this narcissism, but also includes non-ego related causes such as financial gain and worldwide public sympathy. The epidemic of social narcissism is partly the result of hedonism. Narcissism is the result of hedonism. Society-wide narcissism. The hedonism is the result of global nihilism. The nihilism is the result of the fact that people in the West today, and this trend is growing worldwide, are too weak and too inadequate to believe in God or to believe in anything for that matter. See T.S. Eliot quote above. I moved that quote. Rampant sense of entitlement and demandingness. As each generation gets more pampered and spoiled, one can see the bred-in-the-bone narcissism in each individual you meet or observe. Kids today, the demandingness and the sense of entitlement, also the viciousness with which they approach competition at any and every level. The subtext of what they are saying is like, I deserve these resources and goodies of society, and I'm going to do whatever I have to in order to get my share or more than my share. Most of them want more than their share. Reminds me of the scene in Spartacus where the two aristocratic Roman women are admiring their new jewelry, while the gladiators in the pit fight to the death for their petty amusement. Also, what the kid told me about the NYU Film School, where people in the MA program were afraid to talk in class because everybody is looking for any opportunity to look good by making others look bad, so as to make a better impression and get picked for the limited number of PhD slots. This is a nation of narcissistic rage. Now we have found a way of provoking the herd to show off their pent-up narcissistic rage. Let all the poisons that lurk within the mud hatch out, quote unquote. That's a quote from, never mind. Nothing in this world enrages me on a personal and on an intellectual level more than a group of fake and phony people buttressing and reinforcing each other's collective fakery and phoniness. Uneigentlichkeit Volk. The most dangerous problem we have in this country and in this entire civilization right now is this collective, self-reinforcing Disneyland, dream world, fantasy camp worldview that you people inhabit. It is my life's work to destroy your fake world, to bring down the walls that guard your delusional kingdom. You people better give your self-delusions up now, because if you wait for me and mine to take them from you, it's going to be a lot more painful for all of us. Get yourselves a good psychodynamic-based psychotherapist while you still have the chance. Specifics on phony, fake, delusional people. 3 quick, specific delusions, the bubbles of which will get you attacked and or your reputation destroyed if you attempt to burst them or even question them. 1, that women are equal to men and a woman can do anything a man can do. 2, that non-Caucasian, non-European societies, especially Negro-African societies, are not extremely inferior to Caucasian European-derived societies. European-derived includes the US, South Africa, Israel, Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, and etc. Number 3, that homosexuals are born that way, and therefore any therapeutic interventions that claim to be able to reclaim them to normally healthy heterosexuality must be bogus. These are just a few instances among thousands I could cite and discuss, which I will do elsewhere. I don't know why my throat is so dry today. Objective hate versus subjective hate. Acknowledgement. I came upon this distinction reading a book called The Art of Hating by Gerald Wolfe, which is a very important book, even though hardly anybody in the country has read it and it may have sold like 10 copies. Objective hate is hate we acknowledge openly and honestly and express or vent in a healthy manner. Subjective hate is hate we hide and repress and refuse to admit to or acknowledge. Every human being experiences hate of both kinds all the time. Every human being experiences both love and hate all the time, and often both at the same time. An example, you love your 5-year-old child who is sick with cancer or some other serious illness. You love her and take care of her and do everything to see her through this trying time in her life. But moments inevitably arrive when you picture parents with healthy children who are more fun than pain. You wish this for yourself and your child. At that moment, you are experiencing hate for your child. This hate is inevitably subjective and completely repressed from consciousness with most people. Most people in such a situation would not be capable of acknowledging or analyzing such hate. The pain and the cognitive dissonance would be far too much for most humans to deal with. Liberals and other members of the herd deny their subjective hate and project it onto their enemies. This is because to acknowledge any aspect of the hate is very threatening to themselves, because they believe that showing hate will make others see them as bad people, which in turn will result in their being disliked and rejected by others, especially the herd, and could result in their being alone. So they deny and pretend. That's the worst thing for a member of the American herd, to be alone. Inuit words for snow. As many words the Inuits have for snow, we should have for narcissism. For we are as surrounded by narcissism as they their snow. Damn it. And it is, and it is as pervasive an event for us as snow for them. Making this note to myself, make an actual list of Inuit names for snow. They create new names for American narcissism. Contemporary postmortem Americans have talents for rationalization and self-deception that transcend those of any other society that has ever existed. They are more educated in general. They have greater linguistic ability in general than anyone before them in history. They have more words and concepts through which to arrive at excuses and bullshit, to distract themselves from the true motives for their actions, and to create alternative, nonsensical, but egocentric theories to describe their behaviors. Commercial advertising has furthered psychosis in American society. The most destructive industry in American society today, and for the last half-century, is commercial advertising. It has obliterated the very concepts of honesty or sincerity from the American mind. The business of America is business, but like journalism, business is a dishonest enterprise by its nature. This attitude has helped to destroy our culture. Rest assured, I am not promoting socialism or any form of anti-capitalism here, but just attempted to come up with preliminary diagnosis of postmodern America's diseases. Please, one second. I need more water. Oh, this is annoying. This is going to be a long video, so I'm especially sorry for that long interruption. What is this nonsense in this society, in this country today, with people instructing you to like yourself? You don't wake up one morning and decide to start liking yourself. Such liking takes time, introspection, self-analysis, guided psychotherapy. From what I've seen from people in this country today, as opposed to yesterday, when I grew up, they're not going to like themselves simply because they're not likable. This like yourself bullshit that people repeat in forums such as Facebook is just more of what Americans do best. Repeat other people's thoughts, usually people who thought these thoughts yesterday, not in today's America, trying to pass them off as their own and/or what I call cliché repetition. Americans are people whose brains are made up of other people's thoughts, basically. School shootings and spree killings. None of these school shootings or mass shootings would be happening if the people in the vicinity of the shooters specifically, or the people of America in general, were as wonderful as they think they are. Free-floating rejectedness. All New Yorkers are constantly repressing feelings of rejection, feeling free-floating rejectedness. You can't walk down the street without experiencing a rejection of some kind, probably one for every 10 paces. The act of rejecting becomes a pose. It is a reaction formation that defends against the feeling of being rejected by your environment, people around you, etc. People don't look at people here, is the way a friend who just moved here from Frisco once put it to me after he had been here for several months straight. And when I first met him, which is the week he arrived, I told him how ugly a place this is. And after a few months, that's what he came up with. I mean, the problem is people don't look at people here. That's part of the problem. Tattoos are symptoms of deep-seated emotional problems and diagnosable mental disorders. People get tattooed for a variety of reasons, but none of these reasons are healthy or good. Many people today get tattooed because they are motivated purely by peer pressure and conformism. Peer pressure and urges to conform are further symptoms of identity issues and ego fracturization, which are everywhere. The advent of narcissistic theater and TV tears. Video of Ellen DeGeneres and Kristen Howerton. I have clips of these videos of these women forcing tears out of their face while they're on camera. It's so plastic, it is beyond belief. The performer's first member of the audience is him or herself. Narcissistic theater and narcissist poses. Fake crocodile tears. Tears, a performance for the audience. Public crying. Crying for the camera. Kristen Howerton, Vanguard University, and blog Rage Against the Minivan. Narcissist tears, narcissist theater is motivated primarily by please love me nihilism and accompanying narcissism. Some recent hilarious examples of television tears: Chuck Schumer, Jimmy Kimmel, Ellen DeGeneres, or whatever, I call her Ellen DeGenerate, and Kristen Howerton. I call her degenerate because she is degenerate. Sovereign citizens. More evidence that PMA is psychotic and getting more psychotic every day. Sovereign citizens, escapees for the loony bin. Great example of narcissism and narcissist entitlement gone beyond absolutely berserk. If you've never heard of sovereign citizens, you should look them up. There's lots of videos on YouTube and other places on the internet. They're something to behold. I'll leave it at that. The post-mortem phenomenon of animal cathexis. I have named it animal cathexis. In recent years, say going back to the early 70s, Americans have demonstrated an extreme and perverse attention to animals, a bizarre and strange relationship people have with animals in general, but especially with their pets. Phenomenon is related to narcissistic love and narcissistic hate, but even more alienation produced by loss of God nihilism. Pet owners are starting to put clothing on their pets, sweaters, bows on their heads, jewelry around their necks. The corporate world is aware of this and is creating products to that effect. Besides animal communicators and pet therapists and pet psychiatrists, we see toothbrushes and toothpaste for dogs, mouthwash for pets, dog and cat dentistry in general, holistic health care for pets, video, canine dental, web videos on how to brush your dog's teeth. Check it out. Scary. Unless you're one of them. Animal cathexis is dead love. Our attraction to animals is a measure of our inability to love other people or ourselves. The inability to love and cathect fellow humans, so love energies become redirected to things, toys, assorted junk, and also animals. After all, animals don't reject us. This is, our, pet animals. I'll talk about dangerous animals that people have started to anthropomorphize a little further below. This is the true motivation of the animal rights movement, vegetarianism, veganism, and obsession with pets. All these phenomena are examples of alienation from other people and from themselves. Alienation fuels hate for others and oneself. The inability to love other people because they are not able to love themselves and fear rejection. Animal cathexis and pet cathexis. In a nihilist world, consumption becomes a form of worship. Fetishized objects themselves become objects of worship. The transfer of worship from God, Spirit, and the great beyond to consumer products and gadgets is how it's being played out today. America, your car has taken the place of your gods, gods/gods. Animal cathexis is a symptom of decadence and nihilism, taken to the extreme of psychosis or psychotic narcissism. The culture of narcissism in America, as described by Christopher Lasch, Heinz Kohut, Gerald Shanewolf, and others. Everything Americans say or do today has some kind of look at me subtext. This is a self-hatred and a self-loathing at work in the society that manifests itself in each and every single individual member of the society. See Eric Keller, Pain and Poverty and Suffering and Death in section 1 on pathogenesis above. You can see the self-loathing in mass demonstrations, like waving and screaming at Beatles concerts and others, the people rushing to be part of the latest craze and the adoration for fame and wealth, etc., etc., and the ravenous pursuit of technology and cars and overall crap, all of which are destroying the world. Everybody in the society is pathologically narcissistic, including CEOs and government big shots. Postmodern America is a pathological culture of narcissism. It is destroying the world. Difference is the average person has a form of narcissism that allows them to ingratiate themselves with the rest of the herd. But animal cathexis has a deeper, more perverse underpinning and implication. Recently accelerated hyperattraction, hyperattention to animals, most notably wild, deadly animals and other sick animal-related perversion phenomena, are influenced by self-hatred resulting from Hellerian nihilism, Hellerian self-hatred, and desperate attempts at narcotics against self-disgust, which is a phrase created by Eric Keller. Vegetarianism and veganism are anti-earth ideologies, resulting from please love me nihilism, the decadence movement, not an official cultural movement yet, and most of all, better worldism. They would never describe it as decadent movement. They would describe it as morality. PETA, Peter Singer, and animal rights movements are extreme decadence resulting from Hellerian nihilism. Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall are zoologists who are not just studying animals in their natural habitat. They choose to live with monkeys and other objects of study rather than live with men. My hypothesis is that these women are failed women, meaning they have failed in relationships with men. They are afraid of rejection by men, so they give up and live with animals they want to study anyway. A convenient alternative, but certainly not a healthy one. But it gets even sicker and more bizarre. People are living with deadly wild animals such as tigers and lions who very often kill their owners by accident and in their sleep. They are psychotic narcissists who believe they have a special relationship with these animals and therefore the animals would never harm them. Norman Buwalda and Alexander Crispin were both killed by sleeping with or playing with their pet tigers. It's also about the need for specialness, which comes from conformism of the American herd, and narcissism. Others are buying and keeping exotic wild animals, most of which are either dangerous to their owners and dangerous to the surrounding environments. For example, several dozen persons in my hometown of Miami sent away for the Burmese python, an illegal exotic snake. Several of these people got tired of the pythons or were afraid for their children or themselves when they got full grown and they were really big. So they released them into the Everglades, where they have become an uncontrollable population that is eating endangered species and destroying the Everglades ecosystem. A real perfect example is Timothy Treadwell. Timothy Treadwell's animal cathexis. The worst, most bizarre example of animal cathexis is the case of Timothy Treadwell, who believes psychotically that he had a special relationship with a community of grizzly bears in the Alaskan wilderness, and was in the process of making friends with the grizzlies there. He and his girlfriend fed them, filmed them, and as was expected, the bears eventually, but not too long in the making, ate them both. These cases stem from the desperate, extreme, and exaggerated examples of the typical American's need for acceptance by other members of the herd. Pun intended in this case, it's the members of the different mammalian herd, wild bears, not the American herd of humans. These nut jobs are functioning under what I call the desperate American need for specialness, which is related to what I also call slave ache, each motivating a desperate need for attention and please love me nihilism. They fantasize they will get on TV, some do, and provide narcissist theater. Timothy Treadwell made videos of his interactions with the bears, and you can find them all over the internet now if you want to. And television tears to demonstrate what caring and loving people they are, and hopefully imagine they will be loved by the entire nation and maybe even the entire world in return. Tattoos and self-mutilation. Tattoos and self-mutilation. And here I have pasted and copied and pasted the poster for the movie The Illustrated Man from the book by Ray Bradbury, which came out like in around 1970. And it's a picture of Rod Steiger with his entire body covered with tattoos. It's really fucking looks weird. And you find them in the wilds and in the real world, and they're even worse. They make it even worse. They make it even worse. Apparition. Record of a recent conversation about tattoos. Me. Nobody likes tattoos. Idiot. What about the people who wear them? Me. They don't like them either. They don't like them either. Idiot. Then why do they wear them? Me. Because they don't like themselves and they want the world to know it. Conversation with a friend out west about New York City. Me. There are more tattoos on one city block in New York City than in all the trailer parks in Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee combined. It's like a whole city full of trailer trash, only without the trailers. That's what I think of New York. Tattoos and self-mutilation. Tattoos and self-mutilation exemplify somatic narcissism. Tattoos and the rest are forms of self-mutilation as self-scarification. It can be likened to borderlines who slash themselves with knives or razor blades to vent their self-hatred of themselves on their own bodies. Primitive self-destructiveness is what it was called by Otto Kernberg. And here's a quote from his book, Borderline Conditions and Pathological Narcissism. There exists a low-level group of masochistic characters in which rather primitive sexualization of masochistic needs occurs. Masochistic perverse trends may be present, and aggression is discharged indiscriminately toward the outside or toward one's own body. Patients with severe self-destructiveness, but without a well-integrated superego, and with a remarkable absence of the capacity to experience guilt, are members of this group. Typical examples are provided by patients who obtain nonspecific relief of anxiety by cutting themselves or by some other form of self-mutilation, or by impulsive suicidal gestures carried out with great rage and practically no depression. Otto Kernberg, Borderline Conditions and Pathological Narcissism. I maintain that that quote by him applies to people who get tattoos and some of the more bizarre forms of self-mutilation, the bones and the nose. I get into that further below. In a sense, tattoos represent narcissist theater. Emblems of the look at me contingent. Tattoos are a sign and a mark of the other-oriented personality of our times. And there's references to David Riesman. This is what David Riesman was talking about in books such as The Lonely Crowd. Also clarify Ellsworth F. Baker from his book Man in the Trap. He talks about the completely other-directed person today. Tattoos and other forms of self-mutilation are akin to Sartre's discussion of the mustache in his first novel, Nausea. For Sartre, this is a quote. This is a quote from a book by Gary Cox, an excellent book on everyday practical philosophy called How to Be an Existentialist. Excellent book. For Sartre, the mustache becomes the emblem of unthinking men with no inner life. A man cannot see his own mustache, at least not to the extent that others see it. So a mustache exists primarily for others, and a man with a mustache is a man who has undertaken to exist for others, rather than for himself. Insofar as it is typical of the bourgeois to strive to be his social self, the mustache, for Sartre, becomes the emblem of the shallow, self-satisfied, respectable, reactionary middle-class gentleman. From Sartre's La Nausée, quoted by Gary Cox in his great book, How to Be an Existentialist. As demonstrably a personality type which exists more for the other than for itself. Especially true when the tattoos are on their backs, butt, or back of the neck. You see this all over the place in New York City these days. Tattoos are just above their buttocks as the nape of their butts. Narcissism, but also, the more importantly, a mark of a member of the herd. People with tattoos have defiled themselves. The area around the tattoo is akin to a piece of partially rotted meat, with the tattoo representing the beginning of the rot. People with tattoos have unconscious fantasies of themselves rotting away, as in an out-of-control cancer of the entire body, or like a body being destroyed by leprosy. The ink of the tattoo seeps into the soul of the art object, the tattooee, and makes them loathe themselves more and more and even more. The ink of the tattoo seeps deep into the wearer's soul, into the displayer's soul. Piercing. It's like creating an artificial physical deformity where none existed before. It's like feeling deformed inside, emotionally and spiritually, and creating the outward physical manifestation to match the inward feeling and self-image. Excuse me. This is what Eric Heller calls spiritual derangement, resulting from loss of God trauma, loss of God psychosis, loss of God nihilism. A tattoo is a mark of a member of the herd, especially when they put it on their lower back or behind the neck. I am here for others first and not for myself. Another angle on tattoos, the mother smiling over the baby's crib angle. If a person has a lousy mother who doesn't smile down at them in their crib enough when they are very young, reinforcing their developing sense of self, you see the genesis of the personality disorders. And this is standard object relations theory and psychodynamic theory. An empathic, mirroring, accepting, affectionate face will reinforce development of a healthy ego structure. When such is lacking, they will grow up feeling ugly with self-attacking self-objects implanted into their subconscious. It's irrelevant how they look to other people. To themselves, they are ugly. They feel it. So if they make themselves ugly to look at by tattooing or piercing themselves, they can pretend that they have some control over their ugliness, such that they made themselves ugly because they want to, and if they didn't want to, they could make themselves attractive, but they just don't want to. Not that they were made ugly to begin with. They get the tattoo and they can say to themselves, I'm not really ugly, I just appear ugly to you because of my tattoos, or whatever self-mutilation. Self-mutilation is their choice. If I had them removed, you wouldn't think I was ugly. But the person speaking here would still think of themselves as ugly. Self-objects, what's the other term? Self-objects, okay. A tattoo is like a mark of Cain, but self-inflicted. like a self-inflicted sign of self-disgust and self-loathing. My skin isn't alive anymore. It's a dead thing, so I mutilate it. My flesh is not alive. Nazis tattooed members of the Waffen-SS under the left armpit, but that was for a practical purpose. Nobody saw it there anyway. Tattoos are expressionist. They are metaphors for the person's internal emotional states. Expressionism, as a concept of art, is the idea of using objects from the external world to mirror internal states of consciousness or states of unconsciousness, right? It's like if you've ever watched some of the films made in the German expressionist period of cinema in Germany in the early 20s before sound, you see a guy walking around and everything is distorted. The stairway goes to the side, the walls are like this and like this and like that. And it's trying to tell the people in the external world what's going on inside in a symbolic manner. Tattoos represent impurity. They're like a pollution of the flesh, body pollution, like a visible external sign of an internal illness. A tattoo is a loss of purity of the skin. It's expressionist symbolism for the impurity of their soul. Tattoos, piercings are for non-conforming conformists. Many people who practice these subtler forms of self-mutilation are doing so to tell the world around them that they are non-conforming, unique, and therefore special. What they fail to notice is that they are in fact conforming, just not to the greater society as a whole, but to pseudo-rebelling subsets of the population. After all, they didn't wake up one morning as children say, "Can I get decals on my skin that are permanent little paintings? I will go out into the world and find someone who will help me figure out how to poke ink into my skin to make mini pictures that won't wash off when it rains." Their nonconformity is fake. Conformity is about being accepted by some group, to mask feelings of insecurity, alienation, or being habituated to loneliness. They perform perverse acts like getting tattooed to be accepted by the group, which they might not perform if left to their own devices. The ones who have already decided that they're loners are like that. For many post-mortem Americans, tattoos are pseudo-rebellion. Pseudo-individuality is proof positive that these people are not different but very much the same. Very much conformist slaves and members of the herd. Their emphatic insistence on showing the world that they are true individuals helps to hide their guilt over being members of the herd, which in turn hides their guilt over having killed God within themselves. They are emphatically members of the herd because they never bother to step back from themselves and take a look around. They're afraid of what they would see. They affect sincere individuality as a request for acceptance from the group. It's like the scene in the film Midnight Cowboy, where Joe Buck from Texas moves to New York believing he'll make it rich as a stud because he dresses like a cowboy and would stand out as exotic in New York City. Then when he's totally broke, takes a walk around 7th Avenue and finds dozens more failed fake cowboy studs also broke and down on their luck, wandering around Times Square. For anyone who isn't from New York, 7th Avenue is the main avenue for Times Square. It's where it intersects with Broadway. Can't offend anyone in our society anymore by calling them freaks. They prefer thinking of themselves as freaks. Why? So they won't feel so much a part of the herd so much all the time. They feel a part of the herd, and at some subliminal level, they know they are, but they don't want to ponder it. It's herd bad conscience, a form of pretend rebellion, pretend protest by members of the herd against their herdness, superficial, phony rebellion, individuality for people so terrified of true individuality would have them alone too much. Alone terrifies members of the herd. It's pseudo-rebellion for conformists with a bad conscience about being conformists, which is most of America today. Tattoos and fishhooks through the nostrils. These people are completely other-directed. No actions or behaviors are self-directed because they have no true sense of self. They are broadcasting and advertising for someone to mirror back a self to them so they can try it on for size and see if it fits. It never does. Sociological study of narcissism. What does self-psychology say about tattoos? Notes from Otto Kernberg's Borderline Conditions and Pathological Narcissism. You have to understand that I made these videos fast for presentations to funding organizations to get grants and other help that I desperately need. So they're out of order. This is the PowerPoints that I'm reading from in making the video are rough drafts, and they're out of order, and there are repeated things like that, and I'm sorry. Another way of looking at tattoos is as brands, as in cows and other barnyard or stock animals. People who tattoo themselves are making a statement. The statement is, I am like a barnyard animal. There was this waiter working at the Uptown French Roast I used to go to when I lived on the Upper West Side of New York City. He had a tattoo of a barcode on his wrist. Then I saw another and another and another. One chick had a similar barcode tattoo right across the nape of her neck. What is the message these people are trying to send? A tattoo is an act of suicide in small stages. It's masochism. It's self-mutilation. Reaction formation against introjects of ugliness. Emblems of the herd. Against feeling ugly. Conformity. Expressionist art. Deforming their outward appearance to express their inner deformity. Identity with backward, inferior societies. Result of Heller and his important chapter, which I discussed thoroughly in section number 1, called Pathogenesis, Pain and Poverty and Suffering and Death. The chick from Arizona who I dated for a while who played alto. I went out with this young woman a couple of years ago. She was like 19 or 20. She was really good looking. She played sax. She loved music. But we're talking one time, and I'm talking about primitive societies. We're talking about tattoos, and I said tattoos are disgusting. And then my response, and her response was, yes, but primitive and tribal people in the rainforest in Africa, in Papua New Guinea, and etc., have tattoos. And I looked at her with my eyes crossed. I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with anything? It's because they feel so guilty about abandoning God, about losing their religion and losing their morality, that they have created a pseudo-plastic morality for themselves, part of which is worked out as sympathy and identity with inferior peoples. People they consider inferior. If they didn't consider them inferior, they wouldn't just be talking about them. Okay? But they would never admit or acknowledge that they consider them inferior. Certainly, they're inferior to our society. We could press a button and destroy every one of them if we so chose. That certainly has something to do with superiority. At some level, to some degree, tattoos and piercing are a reinforcement of our society's bogus morality. Sympathy with tribal people because they are picked on and oppressed. Also to make a statement supporting the theory of their equality with us, their conquerors. If we were able to conquer them, is that fact not simple, clear, prima facie evidence that in some important ways they are inferior to us, and some other important ways we are superior to them? And I don't care about these peoples, okay? Have a personal grudge that these people are inferior. I don't care. I don't care about non-European peoples in general, really. Except when I meet some on a personal basis and I get a connection with them, all right? But I'm trying to describe what these people are about. The pathology that's going on in the breasts and brains of these people in our society. Infantilism in decaying societies. Extended adolescence, tattoos, etc., expressionism. These people refuse to grow up and direct their lives towards something serious besides playing around with their appearance. Comic book stores all over the place replacing real bookstores. Primetime adult cartoons. Graphic novels and graphic books in general. Skateboarding. People today, especially the younger generation, focused on sex to the extent that they lack the capacity for love. Sex substitutes for love. Loving is scary because you can be rejected and be hurt. New terminology for narcissism shows the major problem it has become. As many words as the Inuits have for snow, we should have for narcissism. For we are as surrounded by it as they their snow, and it is as pervasive an event for us as snow for them. Make an actual list. Oh, I've said this already, I'm sorry. Narcissistic delicacy and narcissistic vulnerability. Political correctness is all about narcissistic delicacy and narcissistic vulnerability. The narcissism and the disingenuousness have got the country to the point where remarks and simple offhand words is all that is needed to make final conclusions about a person's character and morals, and then can be used to take away their means of earning a living and then completely destroying their lives. This is the result of the rage and hate that is boiling under the surface in most Americans today. Everybody wants to get everybody else in this country. Lack of a sense of sense has promoted identity diffusion throughout the culture. Narcissistic sense of entitlement. Perfect example of the astronomical narcissistic sense of entitlement of the typical American. In order to study and learn anything about this rampant sense of entitlement people feel today, one would have to earn a degree in astronomy. Astronomical narcissism is what I call it. You would need a degree not in psychology but in astronomy to understand American narcissism fully. That's how expansive it is and growing. What do I mean by slave ache? The desperate PMA/herd quest for specialness. Severe emotional pain suffered by the average American nobody, because they are nobody and not some famous and wealthy star. The pop culture system has backfired on itself. They bombarded the society at large with their idiot culture, what I call dumpster culture, making people tune in the false belief that somehow they too could become rich, famous, and important, but at the same point feel cheated when they discover that the idiot culture/pop culture has sold them a bill of goods. Hate and rage ensue. And acting out ensues. What promotes narcissism? Over-civilization. American man has an increased awareness of the world around him, and this has induced an increased awareness of the smallness and powerlessness. This is why narcissism is so much more intense in New York City, because the population density in that city is fugue state inducing. Other densely populated cities like Tokyo, Cairo, Hong Kong, Mexico do not exhibit this problem as much as New York City because of essential differences in their cultures that cancel it out, like remnants of class culture and national character elements such as unique traditions of mannerist behavior as in Japan. Refer to examples of John Calhoun's population density experiments with lab rats at Johns Hopkins University and resulting notions of, for example, the behavioral sink. This is one of the most interesting social scientific experiments ever partaken. John Calhoun was a professor of sociology at Johns Hopkins University. He came up to New York to give a lecture at some university here. And walking around New York scared him. He noticed how densely populated, like walking around Midtown is like during lunchtime or even during business hours is like it's impossible. So he decided to study that for a while. So he went back down to Johns Hopkins, created a pen, and put some lab rats in it, and then slowly over the course of weeks or months added more and more and more lab rats until they were crawling over each other. They had no personal space left. There was no corner that they could go in and be away from other rats. And there is an excellent, Star Trek is one of the best shows ever on TV, because each show has a theme on standard philosophical questions and issues, or standard other scientific or social scientific issues. And there was one where they go to a planet where there's no room left for anyone to lie down and sleep. So they have to lie down on top of each other. And the elite are in this one room on the entire Earth where they have enough room to move because they are the elite, and they're trying to figure out, they're asking Star Trek for help. How do we solve this problem? So what he found was that the rats he found, number one, that the rats developed all kinds of sick pathologies. They were eating, when a female rat gave birth, the other rats ate them immediately. They were attacking other rats. They were attacking themselves. And number two, worst of all, when he systematically removed the rats, the exact rats that he added, and systematically removed them over time of weeks or months, the pathology in all the rats, the ones removed and the ones that were originally in the pen when it wasn't overpopulated, the pathologies were permanent. Scary. That's why I tell people that New York City is an open-air mental hospital. The glass teat, Harlan Ellison, as one example of the new mechanical teat. The mechanical teat is related to the mechanical breast. First time in human history that transitional objects have become inanimate and non-organic. Well, that's not actually accurate. When choice of transitional objects are derived from inanimate and non-organic things. Mechanical teat can only function as the bad breast, never as the good breast. This is why borderline personality disorder has outclassed narcissistic personality disorder in recent years. That's what all the objects, toys, techno-gizmos, all variety of lecking devices, and all the favored gadgets of the new American peasantry. The function of acting in narcissistic societies. Who are the most respected professions by different cultures and their different traditions? Traditionally, in German culture, teachers are the most respected profession, most particularly college teachers. And you can see an example of this in Josef von Sternberg's famous film, Der Blaue Engel, The Blue Angel. In Britain, after British royalty, doctors and physicians were the most respected profession going back many centuries. And it was also scholars, too, which the British, I was raised in part on the British tradition of scholarship. And that's related to German respect for professors, because Britons are really Germans after all. They speak a Germanic language. They are descendants of Anglo-Saxons and Norman Vikings. In Britain, after British royalty, doctors and physicians were the most respected profession going back centuries. That is, until the UK implemented socialized medicine, which has destroyed medicine 25 years ago. The Brits had the undisputed best doctors and hospitals in the world. Now, don't even ask. In declining societies that have passed into nationwide epidemics of spiritual and psychological sickness, actors and their variants and perversions, pop culture singers, sports stars, Hollywood movie stars, Broadway theatrical stars, etc., going to a Broadway play is like masturbating where you don't have to touch yourself. They are the most admired profession. It's obvious to see why. Need for excess attention, an unending thirst, hunger for attention, need for specialness, self-medication for slave ache. Don't all empires become narcissistic after too many years of money, power, and success? Isn't this what eventually brings them down? Wasn't it what Babylon and Rome were all about? Isn't this what Jesus was rebelling against? The postmortem American epidemic of psychotic narcissism. The narcissism movement, I call it a movement. Sticks and stones. I'm sorry, I gotta read this again. Sticks and stones, ... When I was a kid, we were constantly crying to our mommies about other kids calling us mean names and using hurtful words. The universal response from most parents was, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That was more than 50 years ago, and that particular parental response has died away. Now everybody says, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words do permanent damage. These aren't just words, no pun. The change in perspective provides us insights into serious psychological issues deep within the psyche of our society. What has changed? Ego disintegration and the fracturization of personality. Ego disintegration is evident everywhere in American society and PMA today. Emotional delicacy, emotional fragility. People are more schizoid and personality disorders as a whole today than, say, 1971, and more fucked up in 1971 than, say, 1945. usually an element of ressentiment in the narcissistic personality. The narcissistic personality is constantly experiencing situations of ressentiment. Evolution of narcissism, symptomatology in PMA. Ego fracturization. I refer to the Synanon game, an experience I had, example, OR to Pier 1. I was in a therapeutic community-style drug treatment program on Miami Beach when I was 12. It wasn't because I was addicted to drugs, but it was because my father just died and I was running the streets as a bona fide juvenile delinquent. And the judge was going to lock me up, but my mother came in her waitress outfit on the way to work and begged him not to. So he said, "We'll get him into a drug treatment, get him into a therapeutic community." So she got me into Operation Reentry, which helped me immensely. One of the things that helped me a lot was we played the original version of the Synanon game. The Synanon game is a form of encounter group psychotherapy where 12 to 15 people sit in a circle, and anything is allowed except drugs or physical violence or threats of physical violence. Right? So there were times when people screamed at each other, like, to break down defenses. Everybody in the group would scream at one person. That was called a rat pack. I was rat packed a lot of times, and it made me really strong. I've communicated with other people who were in Operation Reentry around the same time, and they said, "Oh, it damaged us, and yelling at people doesn't work." It helped me a lot. But anyway, years later, this was in 1971, 72, 73. I was there for 20 months. And remember, in the Synanon game, all range of emotions came out. It was a safe haven where you could talk about your feelings, whatever they were. If there's if you've got a crush on somebody, a lot of people revealed their crushes on each other. If there was a secret love affair going on behind the scenes, the staff would put them in a group. The staff would make sure that they were not in a group together for weeks and weeks, and then put them in a group together. And when people, and there was never a rat pack on a person who broke down and cried, because that was opening up their feelings to the group and to the world. So as soon as that happened, when it happened, everything in the group was supportive psychotherapy and advice and help and offers of personal help, where I will tell you every time, you're not putting the toilet seat down so the women bitch that they sit on the toilet, on the bare, when they sit down to take a shit, they don't look and they sit on the bare toilet itself. So the point of this is that, so this was 1971. So in 1987, I was living in Denver, Colorado, and I took a job in a TC, okay? It was called Pier 1 Therapeutic Community Corrections and Arts, all right? And they practiced the Synanon game. They called it the game, which most therapeutic communities around the world refer to it. But I was talking to staff there, okay? And they warned me. They said, you can't play the original Synanon game anymore with people. They're too the person said this exact phrase. Their egos are too fractured. They can't handle it. They can't handle being yelled at all. So anyway, so ego fracturization. So this is what happened. I'm sorry. This is what happened between 1971 and 1987. Identity diffusion increased, ego fracturization increased, psychosis increased. So there was increase, ego fracturization, all those things. Increase in serial killers, increase in pedophilia, child molestation, and child disappearances. Scary. Rampant sexual inversion, in other words, homosexuality, which is a result of narcissistic issues. Rampage violence and random violence. Stalking and gender crimes. Women are fucked over Women are more fucked up than ever, raising children who are more fucked up than ever. It's like each generation since the 70s when I was a kid got worse and worse. Attacks on patriarchy are a result of this. Recent atheism as revolt against the residue of patriarchy. Mental illness in general has become epidemic today. The borderline epidemic is even more widespread than the narcissism epidemic. I try to repeat this over and over again to people. The narcissism epidemic is more than just narcissism. Our country is seriously mentally ill. Most of the narcissistic personalities are actually borderline personalities with severe narcissistic features. Schizoid personalities abound today. Splitting is akin and serves as an adjustment value for ressentiment. Their rages are the result of splitting, common in the personality disorders, especially BPD. Another aspect is the age of nihilism. We live in the great age of nihilism. There have been periods of history when societies became very nihilistic, but ours today is the worst ever. One predictable, inevitable result of our nihilism is rampant, high-level narcissism. Future generations, or future ages, should they ever come into existence at all, will speak of the 21st century and the last 50 years of the 20th century not as an age of modernity or an age of postmodernity, but as an age of nihilism. One predictable, inevitable result of nihilism is narcissism. People who have no values, valuelessness, and what I call post-mortem American lostness, or are confused or mixed up about their values, or about the values, or about what values are in general, people soon forget the very meaning of the word. Often replace or self-medicate depression and anxiety that comes from that confusion with an absorption in oneself and one's needs. The narcissism of nihilism. What is the relationship between narcissism and nihilism? Special connection as moods of a society. How does nihilism produce or result in an epidemic of narcissism? Our narcissism is a combination of factors and forces, including slave ache and desperate need for specialness among the populace. The narcissism of nihilism. We are in the age of nihilism, and therefore we're also in the age of narcissism. Rampage violence and spree shootings. None of these school shootings would be happening if the people getting shot and their buddies and other people were as wonderful as they think they are. I put this in as devil's advocate to look at the other side, okay? Because when you have these people that go postal and start killing people or blowing people up, they had a problem initially, but other people rejected them and made that problem worse instead of understanding. Preemptive rejection, common defense mechanism, a common defense mechanism I witnessed in New York City. Repressing feelings of worthlessness with trappings of job functionality. New York narcissists, I have a special term for New Yorkers, New York narcissists, attach sense of self with job. I understand this is done elsewhere, but the regularity of it is more extreme here. Of course, this is rampant throughout the nation, but more extreme in New York City, which is the origin of the nationwide narcissist movement. The best defense against being rejected and thus feeling rejected is to reject the person before the person gets a chance to reject you. The population of narciss zombies. Generation X, more like a Generation D, as in D generation. America's most ignorant generation, and it's only getting worse. These people exhibit a narcissistic hubris and sense of entitlement that goes beyond anything the worst emperors of the Roman Empire ever enjoyed. Narcissists Anonymous and the need for group therapy for the nation. The ego structure within the American society has been disintegrating for at least the last 40 or 50 years. My example, the Synanon game at Operation Rancher in 1971 versus the 1987 version at Pier 1 Therapeutic Community Corrections in Denver, where I worked. My father died when I was 12. He was a severe disciplinarian in the tradition of Germanic fatherhood, that is, Judeo-Germanic fatherhood. His death licensed me to run wild and amok because a legitimate juvenile and become a legitimate juvenile delinquent. get expelled from Miami-Dade public school system, get arrested multiple times, and wind up sentenced to live in Dade County Youth Hall for wayward youth until I reached the age of 18. My mother came to court and literally begged the judge to give me an alternative, to give her an alternative. He gave my mother 1 week to find a setting where I could be scared straight before it became too late. Subsequently, I spent the first 2 years of my adolescence in an old-style Synanon-derived therapeutic community called Operation Reentry, located on Collins Avenue and 36th Street in Miami Beach. At the time, I was experimenting with drugs, but not intensely, and was never addicted to anything. I was at least 3 years younger than the nearest member my age. Luckily, the TCs provide general therapy in addition to substance abuse-specific therapy. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we played the original version of the Synanon game. This was a form of encounter group psychotherapy which combined principles of attack therapy with, that's an unfinished slide. Storyline about guy kidnapping celebrities, killing them, and selling their body parts to morbid, rabid fans. Celebrities at French roast around town kidnap them, hang them upside down, drain their blood into airtight containers, and sell it to their morbid fans. It's just a joke. And that's the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for your indulgence.